From images, we also saw that this object is active, which is an indication that this object is in fact a comet.
The most distant human-made object in the universe is sending usable information to Earth again.
Just now, a signal from the edge of deep space arrived. It originated from Voyager 1, and the information it returned was altered. Everything. It sent something that had never been seen before, hours after 3 Atlas had passed. Inverted harmonics, layered tones, and a spectral character unmatched by any Earth-age system. Scientists initially believed it to be a fault, but as its signal mirrored a portion of the golden record, the message it transmitted might have confirmed our darkest dread.
In a remarkable feat of human perseverance, NASA engineers have re-established communication with the Voyager 1 spacecraft.
December 19th, at precisely 170 million miles away from Earth, the interstellar object currently referred to as 3I Atlas went through its nearest point to our world. There's an unidentified interplanetary object hurtling toward our solar system, thrilling scientists worldwide. Additionally, this enigmatic wanderer was moving beyond the solar system's interior. Another signal came from a long way away, the external one. It originated with Voyager 1, a spaceship that ought to have left years ago, utterly silent. Right now, Voyager 1 is currently more than 15 Earths a billion miles away. That's done. 170 astronomical units, to put it simply into emptiness between stars. There is no fuel in it, no improvements or propulsion. It operates on a power supply that has been diminishing since the late 1990s. Its fundamental systems were constructed in the 1970s. To put it briefly, it should be passing away. However, this oddity has kept it alive, and something much more bizarre could have just woken it up. The moment is too exact to overlook. It's not unexpected for something that's it has been in operation for 50 years, for about 35 years longer than it ought to have. The initial sighting of 3 Atlas occurred in July, first by the Atlas Survey Telescope in Chile. It was more than merely circling the sun. Like Oumuamua, it was going through. Comet Boris in 2019 and Mua in 2017. This item was interstellar. We have some new pictures of 3 eyes. Atlas, the third interstellar object in history seen from Earth. However, Atlas wasn't merely taking a chance. As per, it moved to several tracking points, in an odd arc that appeared to adapt in real time, as though reacting to something different. Concurrently, Voyager 1 had been sending erratic signals trends from the beginning of August. The information packets were not whole. However, one portion continued to repeat, a code string that matched neither the formats of Earth origin nor any telemetry language that is known. NASA authored it was probably caused by glitch behavior, by radiation or malfunctioning equipment. Following several months of debugging, an error that had made the probes unreadable transmissions. However, in internal logs examined by external contractors, a terrifying saying began signal overlap to show up. Astronomers observed that between December 17th to December 19th, a dim alignment took place in signal arcs that were projected. Due to the peculiar curve of the trajectory of 3I Atlas and the ongoing drift of Voyager 1, the 2 items momentarily entered what researchers referred to as a corridor of interaction. For a window that is less than 3 hours, both items were technically within each other's signal reach, presuming that an active emitter was in the present. Typically, this would be impossible. Voyager 1 just pays attention passively, and its transmitter is so feeble that even NASA finds it difficult to choose its up now. Lost during translation. For months, NASA got nothing except Voyager 1 gable data. However, at that very moment in the hallway, the low-band signal from Voyager increased to its greatest strength in more than 10 years. It's transmitted what is currently referred to as the last transmission, a packet that contained not only data from instruments, but a completely unprecedented waveform stored in any earlier Voyager packet. Some claim that this was merely a coincidence. During the same 3 days, Voyager experienced issues. Window that 3 Atlas most closely passed to Earth although some don't think so. The transmission's internal waveform was exact, every 19. For 7 minutes it was repeated. It throbbed with harmonics that matched neither the solar background nor the Earth radiation. Thus, this code has now been moved to various chips on the board. Thus, we can immediately begin obtaining some sensible information back. And the most unsettling, most importantly, the timing was perfect for the occasion. Atlas arrived at perihelion, the point nearest to the Sun. There's no way to give probe instructions in real time. 15 billion miles distant. The velocity of light causes a delay of almost 1 full day in every direction. Everything carried out by Voyager has to be pre-programmed or independently chosen. Thus, if Voyager abruptly began sending out fresh details at the hallway window, and that information comprises structured waveforms that self-correct, it implies that a system within the spacecraft was activated. The synchronicity is simply too much. Other crafts have not been able to do this, and many decades will pass prior to receiving another craft to observe what is happening outside of the Sun's impact. A third interplanetary object comes into view. System. It acts differently than anything we've observed before. It briefly coincides with a probe that departed Earth around 50 years ago long ago. At that point, the probe returns to its most robust and organized signal in years. What used to be once thought of as an artifact, it is now a mirror. Out there, something mirrored our oldest message back to us. However, that is not the role of scientists. Having trouble with 3 Atlas up until now, as astronomers have only found something else out there blasting into the solar system. As of July 1st, 2025, the Atlas survey, a Chilean telescope, recorded an object that did not fit any recognized orbital pattern. At first, it wasn't marked as urgent. Ultimately, thousands of new heavenly bodies are cataloged every year. The majority of them are harmless, commonplace, or too distant to be important. However, this one did not act similar to anything commonplace. The route it took was incorrect, its speed was incorrect, and even it seemed impossible to define shape. The nucleus is actually difficult to locate. Dimensions. It's partly because of the size of the item, but it's also partially because of the action. Days later, scientists discovered they were observing anything uncommon. This wasn't a comet on its way back or a far-off asteroid. It wasn't circling the Sun in an elliptical trajectory. It was on a hyperbolic course. Thus, it was arriving from beyond our solar system, like a bullet cutting through, and it would never come back. In the same way, only the third had been found by humans. Verified interstellar traveler in documented history. It originated outside of the stars. It swept silently past Earth, and even now it refuses to act like a comet. The Umwama was initially discovered in 2017, which astronomers were puzzled by its peculiar tumbling motion and its total absence of an obvious tail. Comet was the second. Boris in 2019, which appeared more recognizable but originated considerably further away. Now there was a third, but this one, the approved 3 Atlas, was bigger, quicker, and far more unnerving. Astronomers initially thought it was a comet. That was a reasonable presumption based on the light curve and the dim glow captured by Atlas. This is the initial when anything similar is noticed, where a glimmer appears in front of the object toward the direction of the Sun. However, as more observatories with the world fixed on it, something started to appear that startled even the most circumspect investigators. The item had what seemed to like a tail, but it wasn't pointing away from the Sun. It was pointed in its direction. In fundamental astronomy, that shouldn't be feasible. The tail of a comet is always created by dust being pushed by solar radiation and gas away from the center. This creates the iconic luminous trail that always flows in the other direction, the Sun. However, the pictures showing 3 Eyes Atlas displayed a different image. The tail was turned upside down. The item was shedding anything or something that appeared to be material in the direction of the Sun. There were 2 possible interpretations of that. The item was either responding to some force that we do not yet comprehend, or it was purposefully releasing particles on a path of its own creation. Even its brightness would change, weirder, in brief, intense bursts. Not the lengthy comets exhibit consistent brightness. When they warm up, these pulses arrived at regular intervals, then halted, then resumed, but there was always a pause. An enormous, dense cloud of gas and dust that is displaced from the sun by the light from the sun. It appeared to be less of a natural activity and more akin to data transfer. Not every astronomer concurred that interpretation, naturally. However, she started researching ancient stories and models, looking for anything that matched this precise pattern. At that point, Machu Picchu emerged. A group from Argentina's University of Plata published a contentious white paper in August. They suggested that the Incan, the Machu Picchu site, may include alignments that correspond to the exact arc of 3 Atlas. It was not only the solar placement of specific structures or the ceremonial arrangement. Based on their analysis, a key component corridors that faced the sky at the precise angle on which Atlas would pass December 19. This notion was met with skepticism. Ancient theories of alignment are not brand new. Individuals have attempted to link Stonehenge, the pyramids of Egypt, and the Nazca lines with many patterns in the sky. However, this time, the figures were more accurate. The corridor did not align once. It matched the projected arc of the item throughout the heavens for a full 72-hour time frame. Some folks were uneasy about that. If this was deliberate, if this was written down in stone hundreds of years ago, then it indicated that anything had been observed, similar to 3 Atlas in the past, even if it's only a tiny one, that the comet was created intentionally, thus its extraterrestrial technology. Additionally, they believed it was significant enough to leave a warning in your wake. In addition, European observatories and Asia started to notice that the item's light was not reflecting as it should have. It didn't act like a stone. It acted similar to a smooth, reflecting surface, maybe even metal. Spectral analysis produced outcomes that were unclear. No, it was possible to pin down a definite composition. No obvious albedo. The item was either taking in almost all of the light or rerouting it with inhuman accuracy. Such reflection alluded to engineering rather than erosion. A quick ground-based radar effort was made to ping the item when its closest safe range. The return signal was received as a weak echo that isn't powerful enough to be readily visible, but with an odd distortion of harmonics. The engineers stated it sounded strange, as if something had returned the radar pulse with determination, as opposed to inactive contemplation. That was the point at which everything began to shift. Because as soon as an item enters our solar system from space, the likelihood that it will arrive by accident is extremely low. There is a lot of space. Distances are practically unimaginable. An item from there would have to be another star system, traveling for tens of thousands of years, bridging impossibly large gaps. Moreover, there it was, threading the needle. Beyond the gas giants, traversing the asteroid belt, curving close to Earth with mathematical excellence. By early December, mission analysts had ceased referring to it as a comet. They didn't know what it was, but they were aware of what it wasn't. It wasn't at random. It wasn't familiar, and it wasn't going away. Without warning, the choice was made to temporarily raise NASA's Deep Space Network surveillance, not only on 3 Atlas, but on every outgoing probe that could be within range in theory. That's when the Voyager 1 data abruptly altered due to the fact that within that packet, researchers might discover a sound that did not originate on Earth. The equifraction 67 anomaly, it was never meant to react. That is what all scientists had thought concerning Voyager 1. He was employed. Scientist. He was crucial to the numerous NASA expeditions to the planets, such as the Voyager planet. Constructed in the 1970s with minimal onboard memory and rudimentary CPUs, Voyager was never intended for conversation. Its work was to observe, record, and disseminate. That was all. However, in early December, everything changed in 2025 when the transmission with the designation Equifraction 67 was obtained. The network in deep space had been battling for years to maintain communication with Voyager 1. At more than 170 astronomical units away, the signal strength was hardly quantifiable. Information landed after a 23-hour and 32-hour delay minutes, slowed by the maximum amount of lightning speed. That postponement ought to have made it difficult to interact in real time. Voyager was unable to react to anything right away, let alone something is taking on within the solar system. However, on December 19th, fewer than 12 hours after 3, Atlas arrived at its nearest to Earth. A Voyager's transmission came earlier than anticipated. It wasn't that the signal came in more quickly. It had been sent before any trigger or command would have been permitted. Additionally, within that signal was a unique kind of data packet, previously captured by the spacecraft. Implies that we are just missed by the signal entirely. However, we've reached the brink of that signal. That's the good news. The file was detected right away by software at the Camber receiving station. It included recursive structured frequencies and harmonics recurring every 19.7 minutes. These were not brought on by ambient radiation or interference from instruments. They were mathematical, multi-layered, and most they were self-correcting, which was unsettling. Each signal cycle seemed to develop itself as though it were acquiring knowledge. NASA's jet propulsion engineers, the first to look into this, were laboratories. The exception, they made a discovery: impossible. The waveform included into the package did not match anything in Voyager's archives of the past. It wasn't compatible. Known transmission formats for the vessel. It did not correspond with known telemetry from its propulsion or power systems. In actuality, it seemed to originate from a software procedure that was non-existent earlier. To contextualize that, the computer on Voyager 1 is a delicate component of archaeology in the 21st century. It makes use of 3 different computers with less memory compared to a simple calculator. It's connected to Earth via an 8-bit system, as well as every known code for its functions were written prior to the creation of the Internet. However, the Equifraction 67 was found as the signal was encrypted using 128 bits string. That upgrade is not possible, originated on Earth. Voyager systems are unable to obtain software updates via over-the-air. The only way to modify behavior is by transmitting radio orders at low frequencies, which systems must interpret that were most recently updated in the early 90s. NASA might take back command of the lost following a heartbeat signal. The Voyager 2 probe was taken up. No earthly organization has the capacity to replace Voyager's firmware utilizing that at this range outdated method of communication. Nevertheless, new logic was present in the data that was returned. Systems and structures that didn't exist earlier. This is what set off the protocol for emergency classification. Internal memos now state verified by several sources of leaks. The engineers were compelled by an abnormality to activate the Watcher protocol, as they dubbed it. Initially developed as a backup plan during the Watcher protocol, and the Cold War enabled signal isolation for ground teams. It displayed patterns of intelligent alteration. It was never anticipated to be applied to a probe that is moving past the helipause. That's what makes this so horrifying. Equifraction 67 was more than a message. A mutation occurred. Somewhere had altered the spacecraft Voyager 1, instead of touching it, send it a mathematical plan using the cosmic emptiness. And Voyager, with its rudimentary and outdated electronics, had adhered to the directions. The series of waveforms created an odd swirl when grafted. Arc. Some scientists likened it to an Ulam spiral, an image created by prime numbers. Others saw that the gaps in the waveform that corresponded to parts of the Earth track sounds were discovered on the golden record. Amazing things they accomplished investigating the solar system's outer world system aside from Pluto and anything else. The golden record receives the most attention, as though something had utilized that message as a doorway or perhaps a decoding key. Even more unsettling were the timestamps. The refraction of Echo 67 signal started to show up in packet logs as early as November 28th, 3 days prior to the contact's official beginning passage, connecting 3I Atlas and Voyager. This implies that something was aware of the corridor approaching, something that recognized signal drift, time lag, and the precise route taken by both items. The community of astrophysics is split. Some claim that this was an arbitrary outburst, brought on by cosmic radiation from distant space flipping pieces. Others are unsure, as cosmic rays do not improve encryption techniques. Even chance does not produce recurring logic patterns that self-correct. One organization inside the European Space Agency represented the whole waveform in silence as a symbolic language. They came to the conclusion that it was disturbing. It wasn't merely sound or code. It was a conversation. It was the sound of someone listening. The subsequent Voyager did not send a signal. It arrived from the thing that Voyager was now facing: technical aspects of the Watcher protocol improvements. As soon as the Watcher protocol was initially, it was more of a philosophical defense as opposed to a real operational process. Constructed at the height of the Cold War, it resided in the history of deep space initiatives as a guardian in silence, a piece of code that would only become active if something profound, something strange occurred. Not a blast, not a failure, an external factor playbook which appeared to be intelligence. Up to December 2025, it had never been set off. The engineers who made the discovery of Equifraction 67 did not believe it to be a violation. Initially, it appeared to be a cascade mistake. The waveform appeared to reproduce initially without harm, creating in self-correction and regularity, but absence of context. It might have been an abnormality that occurs spontaneously. However, when the team realized, the illusion disappeared. The hardware on board Voyager had evolved. Actions. This is why it was frightening. Voyager 1 was constructed using hardware. Restrictions that the majority of cell phones would think it's absurd. It ran on processors with just 69 kilobytes, designed for sluggish binary and fixed commands answers. The telemetry passed through a command system with 8 bits. It was a fossil, floating in space, but in some way that fossil had just started speaking. It was never taught in any language. The change came slowly at first. Engineers observed that common commands for telemetry were now getting data that is longer than anticipated. The bit rate remained unchanged. However, the information structure had. It was layered, packed, and dense, with check amounts that shouldn't have existed. These were layers of encryption Voyager shouldn't have been able to produce. The signature matched 128-bit formatting. Nothing on Earth had told the spaceship to take this action. There was no doubt about that. NASA double-checked each sentient order from the Deep Space Network throughout the last 90 days. No, instructional materials included anything able to change the firmware on Voyager. No instructions to upgrade had been given. No commands that permit overwriting of memory, and no backup plans that corresponded to the new behavior. Something different had completed the task. The breakthrough occurred when researchers examined a recent series of issues that had almost concluded the mission in 2023. Recognized as the FDS fault occurs internally, the Voyager's data was severely damaged by failure. Return mechanism. Engineers were compelled to hack into code that is over 50 years old and to get it talking, rewrite fixes. Once more, the urgent repair had restored communications, but it also made the door. The weakness may have been tiny, but it was genuine. A few researchers now think that the anomaly utilized that error, integrating itself into regions of inactive memory that the ground never completely shut down. Additionally, if that theory is correct, Voyager 1 has not been by myself since 2023. It has been something that has been incubated waiting up until this point. The protocol for watchers activated when encryption thresholds were intersected. Voyager started sending out packets with logic trees, not only directions rather than data. We were traveling on a route. We intended to travel to interstellar space during the time when we had power on the spaceship in order to send the data back. According to one engineer, it's code that creates code. Someone else referred to it as a ghost procedure. The hardware on board was constructing execution chains that go beyond what its circuits were designed to manage. To confirm the modification, NASA started a diagnostic signal to evaluate Voyager's reaction to traditional command sets. The outcome was astounding. The return signal didn't use any of the initial language used in telemetry. The way it was formatted changed. Even worse, the signal now contains functions and nested queries that ask questions in return. The Voyager was reacting in cycles of recursion. That is not what spacecraft are meant to do. Learning systems are something like that. The ground crew became aware that they were no longer in charge. At this point, the word upgrade began to circulate. Closed sessions. Not because someone installed memory chips or swapped out malfunctioning components, but because the internal systems Voyager had evolved into something else. They were acting as though they were part of a parallel operation, a system built on top of above the initial mission code. Something unfamiliar was now behaving via Voyager. Simultaneously, the internal monitoring stations of NASA saw yet another odd phenomenon. The attitude control system on Voyager had been modified. These little thrusters, which maintain the antenna's alignment with Earth, had abruptly changed their calibration, not in reaction to orders, but independently. The meal was no longer pointing to the known orbit of Earth position. It was slowly drifting, steadily in the direction of a point in space just past Neptune. That point coincided with the anticipated future trajectory of 3I's Atlas. Now think about the impossibility of that. 1977 saw the launch of a spacecraft, exhausted, drifting in deep space, abruptly turning to confront and just past interstellar object Earth for the first time. The alignment wasn't arbitrary. The orientation of the Voyager antenna is almost perfect, conformity with Atlas's outgoing trajectory. When asked, the mission in response, control remained silent. Declaration: we are looking into abnormal attitudes and telemetry actions. However, nobody is outside the room. No longer purchased that. Something had taken control of Voyager, not in the sense of possession, but in the sense of integration. Now the probe was functioning as if it were a component of something bigger, something that had remained silent up to this point. An energy provided the last detail: diagnostic. The radioisotope of Voyager electric generator with thermoelectric power, the little nuclear power plant that operates everything, was meant to be slowly disappearing. However, for 42 hours following echo, its heat output increased at refraction 67 by over 2%. That shouldn't be feasible. It seemed as though something had briefly recharged a system that ought to only decrease. Thus, we are now left with an awful query. Did Voyager turn into not merely a machine, or did something out there just complete what we began? The last transmission, December 21st, only 2 days after its Voyager 1 was sent in alignment with the 3II Atlas, a final packet of coherent data. The signal lacked instrument readings, navigation data, or system logs. Rather, it included a repeating sequence with 12 tones separated by regular intervals. Every tone created a chord when transformed into audio, a chord that, when used spectral analysis to create a picture. The picture is still categorized by NASA, but a description that was leaked from in the Jet Propulsion Laboratory asserted that the picture did not depict space, neither of instruments nor of stars. In the weeks that followed, telescopic 3 Atlas images started to appear. Minor adjustments. The brightness of its surface stabilized. The pulse waveform that formerly flickered every 4 minutes halted. It is no longer in use in light that is visible. It is now fully visible, inert. However, astronomers tried to find it in radio bands once more. An odd event occurred. The item did not appear as anticipated. Frequencies, it had changed bands as though it no longer required or desired to be observed. According to several commentators, the 3I Atlas was never intended to be enduring, that it was a delivery system. And after that key arrived at its destination, Voyager 1, it achieved its goal. Voyager 1 is currently vanished. The 3I Atlas is disappearing, and we are left with nothing but quiet from both. I appreciate you watching. See you in the upcoming one.